All right, welcome everyone to another vlog episode of Mama Untold Thoughts. I'm your host, Meenakshi. I want to thank Courteney Werner, who is a chiropractor here in Ottawa, for hopping on this conversation with me today to speak all about motherhood and her journey. So, welcome, Courteney. Thank you for being here.
Thanks very much for having me.
Of course. So Courtney and I just kind of connected on Instagram. I've been following you and your practice, and I know you are doing amazing work in the community and making sure that everyone is, keeping well and keeping safe during this pandemic. We're still in a pandemic. I started this gosh, I think right at the beginning, like right in March, February, March, and it's just been 1 month after the other, and we're still in the thick of it. So, so Courtney, why don't you share a little bit about yourself for everyone watching?
So I am a chiropractor here in Ottawa. I'm originally from Thunder Bay, so I've been in Ottawa for 5 years, and I love it here and never leave.
Yeah.
I opened a business called Triada Health Ottawa last year with um, my two business partners, who are an acupuncturist and a massage therapist,
Okay.
and kind of right in the middle of getting our business ready to open, I found out that I was pregnant with our first child. So we actually opened our doors. I think I was like 3 days into my third trimester when we actually, so it was a lot all at once, a
Mhm.
lot of really, really good things at once. But it was a full on year for sure. And you're right, we're kind of still in this pandemic. So I think since we started the journey of opening this business, like nothing has been normal or typical for any of us. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, kudos to you for starting that and for taking that. I guess it's like a leap of faith, right? Like you just don't know what's going to happen, and unless you try it, you'll never know, right? So it takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to do that. So let's talk a little bit about your motherhood journey and what that's been like, because I know you have a special story to share, and I'd love for you to share it with everyone.
So I think, like many people, becoming parents was not as quick and easy as we thought it would be. Um,
Mhm.
that's a story that I hear in my practice all the time. I primarily, although I do see everyone, I primarily see like pre and postnatal women, lots of, back pain during pregnancy for a lot of people, and lots of, difficulties with transitioning our bodies into motherhood. So I see a lot of that, and I hear a lot of people saying this, this wasn't what I expected the journey to be. And that's kind of how it went for us as well. And kind of just, I think my husband and I had the conversation, we're right in the middle of opening this business. Now is maybe not a good time. Why don't we put that on hold, and we'll kind of come back to it. And of course, I didn't know at the time, but when we had that conversation, I was already pregnant with my daughter, Cecilia. So, that's kind of the beginning of the journey, was just it not starting where we expected it to start. And I think they say this about motherhood, like, are you ever prepared? No, like, you'll never be, I think, financially stable the way you want to be when you become a parent, or emotionally stable, or, we kind of put all this pressure on ourselves to be in this perfect place. And I don't think that place exists. You just kind of jump in and do your best. Um, and we found out, I guess it was 20-week ultrasound, that my daughter wasn't growing as expected. So one thing that I say to patients a lot as well is that 20-week ultrasound, or 18 to 20 week, that's an exciting one because it's when you can find out the gender, but it's also where you potentially are getting news that things might not be as expected.
Mhm.
It's not always a bad thing, right? It's just you have to change gears a little bit. So she was 20 weeks, and her limbs were measuring around 15 weeks, so about 5 weeks behind. I was being managed by a midwife at that point, and she then sent me for a referral to see a maternal fetal medicine specialist.
Okay.
So we then kind of went from this journey of thinking that we were going to have, a birth in the birth center with a midwife. And I had this very idyllic
Mm-hmm.
idea of what giving birth and bringing my daughter into the world would be like, which I think is probably maybe a little idyllic for anyone. And it was not that experience. So um, we ended up transferring care several times. So we were sent to the civic,
Okay.
and then to the general for a higher level of care again. Um, my daughter has what's called osteogenesis imperfecta, and her type is type 3, which is the most severe that's possible for survival.
Okay.
It's brittle bone disease, and it's a type of dwarfism. Uh, it sounds really scary when I say that to people. And I think people's initial reaction is, oh my goodness, that must be horrible.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is she does have special needs, but our day-to-day life is pretty similar to, I would say, most moms. Like my biggest struggles are, I think, the same struggles that most moms have. It's not all, emergency medical stuff that stresses me out. It's mostly just like, constipation and sleep deprivation, her constipation, and, not sleeping enough. Like that kind of stuff is still, I think my motherhood experience in a lot of ways is very similar to everyone else's. And I think the misconception is that because she has this disease that it's going to be totally different.
Absolutely. And I love how you put it too. And it's so true that you can never be prepared for this journey. Like as much as you try to plan for it, as much as you have it written down in your, in your 5-year vision, it never works out to be that way. Even I'll speak from my own experience, my birth plan was nowhere close to what it had actually happened.
Yeah.
And so it's just the way it goes, right? And I'm a big believer that we're only given as much as we can, of course, chew. And so we all have, our own struggles and our own challenges that we've endured during this journey. So going back to that 20-week ultrasound, when they shared this news with you about your daughter, what was going through your mind, and what were you and your husband, talking about and thinking about? Like, what were those emotions like?
Yeah. So, I mean, at the 20-week, it was kind of, when they say that the limbs are a little bit behind, it's kind of a soft marker for things. So it's not a definitive diagnosis. Sometimes it's just a smaller baby, right? Sometimes it's nothing. Those can be markers for Down syndrome, can be markers for all sorts of dwarfisms, what's considered the lethal forms of dwarfism. So at that point, there was so much kind of unknown on the table that I think we were fairly optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
It was not certainly the news we were expecting. I mean, I will say I was like secretly hoping that we were having a girl. I really felt it was a girl the whole time. So I went in like really like stoked and excited. And I was like, okay, we're going to find out that I'm having a girl. And we were. So, there was a lot of like celebration, and, we called our parents kind of right away to tell them. So I would say overall, it was really, I'm an optimistic person, and my husband as well. We're pretty like glass half full people. So we're like, okay, well, we don't know anything yet. It was at 22 weeks, we had the level 2 ultrasound, and we had an experience there that I don't think I've come across another parent of a child with one of the more severe forms of dwarfism and even the more common forms actually, that have had this experience. And we were told at the 22-week ultrasound that our daughter wouldn't survive. There was almost no chance. It was very bleak at that point. And in the moment, obviously very devastating.
Mm-hmm.
We were given, the option to discontinue the pregnancy or kind of monitor and continue, with the understanding that it was likely not going to be a favorable outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, obviously I have therapy, so that
Yeah.
work through that. I think a lot of people should see a therapist, even if they haven't had something that traumatic, because there's a lot of things to work on with yourself. But now that I've kind of dealt with that, kind of got my head around that mentally, that is an experience that is really, really common to parents of children like me. And unfortunately, the research that a lot of specialists are still using is a little bit outdated in terms of what survival rates are actually possible. When you talk to the neonatologists and like the NICU teams of what they think is possible, some of them maternal fetal medicine specialists and what they think is possible, it's like you're looking at the worst possible outcome and the best possible outcome. So we switched doctors and had a better experience and a more positive experience with the second specialist we saw. And we also, I will give a huge shout out to Roger Nielsen's house, which is the children's hospice here in Ottawa. They managed my pregnancy and helped us make a birth plan that would be both realistic and give us as much opportunity to bond and have the experience we wanted should things not be as we'd hoped. Obviously, that 22-week prediction of doom and gloom was not accurate in our case because my daughter's 10 months old. Mm-hmm. She's like laugh screaming away upstairs. I can hear her here. So not accurate, but I think a really, common traumatic experience for parents of disabled children, unfortunately.
Yeah, but you made a good point and stressed this, that therapy, that's I think an important factor, that if there are parents going through this right now, but even like you said, just see a therapist just for I always just say getting that third party opinion is always important in our lives, because as moms and as parents, we've just got so many things that we're juggling at once, and sometimes we just need that perspective, that from the outside perspective.
Sure.
As you were just sharing the story, I was just I had a lump in my throat, because it's very that must have been very difficult for you and your family, and I'm very happy to hear that your daughter is thriving and she's 10 months old right now. So let's go to that point of, okay, you continued the pregnancy, that was your decision, and then the time that you had to give birth, and then kind of the subsequent events that happened after that. What was that like for you and your family?
Mm-hmm. So I think I have the great privilege of being a doctor myself, of being a chiropractor, and having a research background, a privilege and a curse at points. So when I initially got the news that they weren't expecting favorable outcomes, the first specialist, she wouldn't give a diagnosis. She just said, it looks like one of these things. So I said, okay, well, we then I went into research mode, which I found very comforting and my husband found very distressing. So I kept it to myself. And I looked at all these cases, and, I looked at my ultrasounds and the reports and what kind of my child was looking most like. And I couldn't, in my mind, definitively say to myself, I'm convinced that this is a lethal diagnosis. I was like, it looks like this, but we're missing this. It looks like this, but it's missing this. And because I couldn't, I don't know. I think no one knows until they're in that situation what exactly they would do. It's very easy to say, no, I wouldn't continue, or yes, of course I would. But I kind of went through everything, and I was like, I can't, I'm not convinced. And we saw a genetic counselor at GEO. They weren't, 100%. And we didn't do the amnio at that point. So the option was to do the amnio then it would have been about 23 weeks. And it's 4 to 6 weeks before you have results back. So I thought to myself, okay, so I'm potentially as many as 29 weeks pregnant by the time we have these results. At that point, what's it going to change for me? So we decided, at that point, it's your child, you feel the baby moving at 23 weeks already. So I was like, this is something we're going to continue. And like I said, we had the support of Rogers House. So we made a birth plan. And when you're faced with the decision and the situation that we were, you're given the option with the neonatal team, the NICU team, of what you'd like to do when the baby's born. So would you like them to do full intervention and try to get the best possible outcomes? Or would you like to do what's called comfort care? And no judgment on either choice here. It would basically be, you're just given the baby and the time that you have, and you get to enjoy that time with the child. Again, I'm an optimist. So at first we had said, we were thinking of comfort care because I didn't understand, I think, that there'd be an option to both try intervention and try and have memory making. It's not one or the other, right? My fear, and I think other parents in my position that have the same fear, is that if they are trying intervention, that we might miss, the baby's maybe in another room and we might miss that time, and we don't want to miss that. So that's very scary, right? So we talked to the neonatologist, and this was at the general hospital. And the team there basically said, listen, if the baby is born, breathing and trying, we have a really good chance of trying to stabilize that baby. And it becomes very obvious very quickly if it's not possible. So they were encouraging to try. That was very good news to us. So we opted for what's called full intervention. So do absolutely everything you can to stabilize that baby. So the birth experience, I went into labor at 12:15 on Christmas.
Okay.
So I spent the entire Christmas day in labor. A lovely Christmas gift, actually. But we went into the hospital fairly early for monitoring. And when I actually gave birth, it was like the full NICU respiratory therapist team. It was like there were so many people in my hospital room. It was like, if you've ever been shy, it is like way past that. There was like, I think like 15 people stuffed in that little room waiting for her. And the first thing that I heard when she was born was, if she's crying, she's breathing. And she was like bawling. Like, it was the most amazing baby cry I've ever heard in my life. So that was for us like the music to our ears, that things were, at least then, going well. So my husband and I had a deal that he would stay with baby kind of no matter what. So he left the room with her. Unfortunately, we didn't get to hold her or anything like that before she was taken from the room, because she did need urgent intervention. But he went with her, and she was stable at birth, which was wonderful. And very quickly, they figured out that the diagnosis that they had initially thought was not accurate. And she did have multiple broken bones. And that lends itself more to the diagnosis that she has. So very fortunately, they were able to get her comfortable pretty quickly, and they transferred her to GEO. So that was kind of a whirlwind experience, I think. So she was born really quickly when it actually came time. Like, labor takes a while, but things went really quickly near the end. And it just kind of like, you're sitting there after you've had this baby, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, I like pinch myself. Is it going? So yeah, we were pretty lucky. We did have some difficult challenges while she was in the NICU. She did end up having a respiratory arrest, which is she stopped breathing, and they had to do like full intervention to get her breathing and intubate her. But considering she had such a tough start, she uses no respiratory support now. She's not on oxygen, nothing like that. So she's come a really long way, and we've been just really blessed that it's gone so well for us.
Absolutely. And how long was she in the NICU for?
She was in the NICU for just under 3 weeks, and then she was transferred upstairs to one of the wards for another week. And then we spent a week at Roger's house doing transition to home. So unlike a lot of babies that come through the NICU, the kind of prerequisite to bust your baby out of there is that they have to be able to go to the washroom on their own, eat on their own, and breathe on their own. And she was not. So for preemies, when they can do all of those things, they don't have a feeding tube, that kind of stuff, that's when they can kind of go home. For my daughter, it's a little bit different because a lot of children with her condition need a little bit more feeding support. Mm-hmm. We took her home still with a feeding tube, an NG tube, and we learned her care for that at Roger's house. So we went home with a little bit more medical supplies than most families do. So we had a bit of a learning curve.
Yeah.
No matter how much you think you know about, I think even if you're a nurse yourself or a doctor yourself, doing those things for your own child is a whole different story. But yeah, we had a really, really positive experience at CHEO. Mm-hmm. They're so wonderful, all Cecilia's little cheerleaders. And we were really happy to get home when we did, but it was a good experience with them.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to hear that. I know CHEO does an amazing job, and Roger Nielsen House as well, for supporting and helping families. And that was kind of my next question to you was, how were you supported? Did you feel you were well supported, not just from, the doctors and the support staff at Roger Nielsen House, but within, your own family and your friends? Did you feel that support for when you brought, you welcomed home your daughter?
Mm-hmm. I think, so my husband and I chose not to share my daughter's diagnosis while I was pregnant very widely. Okay. So we kept that, some of our immediate family knew, but we decided that we wanted to enjoy the joy of our pregnancy as much as possible, and kind of the normalcy that we could create around that. So it was, I think, surprising to some of our friends and family that things were kind of not perfect. And I think we did have a lot of support. There were a lot of people on our team. Mm-hmm. I think I know some moms that have had babies with this condition since COVID started. We kind of have an online support group. Okay. And I think with COVID, it's a lot more challenging to have support. Certainly, there, I did not know how much community support there is out there for disabled children. And my husband is in the military, mm-hmm. Supports the military as well. So I had other moms, people I hardly know, kind of reach out and be like, have you connected with this resource? Have you connected with this? Have you heard about this? We had in-home nursing and dietitian come to the house and stuff in the early days. So we were well supported that way. Culturally, European, and my husband is Hispanic. Mm-hmm. And I think in both of those cultures, there's still a lot of stigma about disabled people. Mm. The mentality is a little bit behind, I'd say, where we are in Canada. And I'm not, calling out our families for this at all. I think it's an adjustment for people in general. But there were some kind of growing pains in trying to explain to certain, particularly older family members, that it's not something that she will grow out of. Yes, we're very optimistic, but, questions like, well, will her legs straighten out, or will she walk? Maybe she'll walk, very well meaning. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. walking is not the kind of, you know, barrier to having a good life. That's not the kind of bar that we're setting. So it was, I think, a little frustrating, taking with a grain of salt that, I mean, also in other places, children might not have the same resources and might not have the same outcomes that my daughter does in Canada, right? We're very, very lucky to have the resources we have here.
Yes. Yeah, no, and this whole conversation, Courtney, is just, it's very enlightening, it's very eye-opening. And just that point you made about the cultural component, that there is still a lot of stigma that exists. I come from the South Asian background, and it's, very similar. I find people don't want to talk about it openly. They don't want to talk about what their children are going through and whether they do require special needs. When in actuality, there's nothing wrong with it, and that's something that that needs to be spoken more about. Is that, how do we help these children even more? How do we take that extra step to ensure that they are getting the resources that we need? Yes, you're right. We do live in a very privileged country where we do have access to healthcare and the right doctors and the right resources to help us, but it's the mentality that still kind of hovers over some of the cultural, components as it relates to situations like this. So thank you for bringing that up and being so open about it. I think more conversations, hopefully like this, and raising just that awareness about your child. And I know you're very vocal about that on your social media, and that's something that I've just been in awe of, and I appreciate so much from you. And how has that been? How has that been, sharing kind of the journey of your daughter and giving updates as things are going on? How has that been with you?
So initially, we didn't share much, right? We didn't share anything with the pregnancy. Initially, I kind of posted that she was born. I have a lot of like patients and friends that follow me on Instagram, and I worked until December 21st. I had her on the 25th. So my patients were very aware that I was like very pregnant at that point, and honestly would recommend that other people maybe stop working a little earlier than she was a little bit early. So I thought I had more time than I did. Initially, I wasn't sharing, and as it was kind of trickling through some friends and people that I had told, I was getting a different reaction than I expected as a new mom. So I think we're all so excited, and even though our journey was different, we're so excited to have our daughter. And you kind of expect the congratulations, and we were getting a lot of like condolences. So we're so sorry, your daughter is has this condition. We were getting a lot of that kind of messaging, which I think, maybe a year ago, I would have been guilty of the exact same thing, because it seems like what we should be saying is, I'm sorry. And I think whether a parent has a child that is disabled, or maybe has even had a new baby pass or a stillbirth, from me anyways, and I think this is true for a lot of parents in my position, we still want to celebrate that child, even if things had not gone well. I'm sorry isn't what you want to hear when you've brought a child into this world. We want to hear, like, congratulations on your beautiful child. I think either way. So my husband is a very private person, and he was fine to just not share anything. But I kind of felt that I have a platform where I could share, and I wanted to let people know that, her disability to us isn't a burden, and it isn't a tragedy. And I think, especially brittle bone disease, osteogenesis imperfecta, it's one of these diagnoses that we hear and we kind of like have a visceral reaction. We cringe. It sounds like it's going to be so awful. And don't get me wrong, there are parts that as a parent are really hard to deal with. But her whole life isn't that. It isn't pain. Her day-to-day is, giggling and playing and doing what all babies do. So I I wanted to use my platform to shed light on the fact that, a disability is not a tragedy. Um, there's a lot of beauty in childhood in general, and that's only one small piece of who she is. So when I share on social media, I do share updates about her health, but I try and share, kind of her day to day, like we're walking dogs or we're, trying new foods, right? So that's just a tiny piece of who she is. And I hope as she grows that she doesn't think of herself first as Cecilia with this dwarfism, but Cecilia who likes unicorns and, watching Max and Ruby or whatever she's into, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Courtney, you're doing a phenomenal job, both you and your husband um, for showcasing the normalcy around it. That at the end of the day, she's a child, just like, any other child who wants to watch, like you said, like Max and Ruby, or, eat treats all the time, or whatever the case might be, right? Sharing a glimpse of, yes, there are hardships as well along this journey, and it's important for people to realize and recognize that, and be made aware of that as well. So you're busy, you've got a business, your mom life, and of course life in general is always chaotic. How do you balance it all?
I think, COVID is a whole crazy curveball, I think, for everyone, because the support systems that some of us thought that we would have in place when we're trying to stay in smaller bubbles are not the same. So initially, I took 2 months off work. So I went back to work on the 2nd of March, and my husband took paternity leave until the beginning of November. So I was back at work 2 weeks before the pandemic hit, and then I was off again for 3 months. I don't think any families both anticipate to be off on EI at the same time. That's not what we expected. We made it work, and I'm thankful for the government support that we had during that time. So the first kind of 3 months of the pandemic, although there's so many negative ramifications of this pandemic, and I won't gloss over that, but we were kind of in isolation mode already, because my daughter is susceptible to respiratory illness, and it was flu season in general. So really, we were kind of just in our small family unit. I was home with her, and my husband was working at that time. And then we were kind of all off together for 3 months. So in terms of, I was already getting grocery delivery because I couldn't go anywhere with her.
Yeah.
Not much changed for us other than we were kind of home as a family unit. So we were kind of fortunate in some ways to have that time together. Balancing, I think, is hard for everyone. I have been working and having my husband home, so that he's been doing a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to parenting. I would say, the best advice that I can give on how to balance is you're never going to be 100% on every front. If I'm being 100% mom, I'm not being 100% business, Courtney. I'm being 100% business. You can't, like, there's a myth, I think, particularly around moms, that we can do it all. You can do it all. You just can't do it all at once. So it's kind of finding what your comfort level is. And for me, I do a lot of work, and I know one of my business partners, Tracy, she has a daughter who's 6 months older than mine. We both kind of do a lot of work after bedtime, and kind of that's how we get things done. And, I have my patient treating hours kind of in the day, and then we have our, business running hours kind of after dark. And I think that's just kind of what a lot of parents who are self-employed in particular have to do.
Yeah, exactly. Right now it's I keep calling it survival mode. It's whatever we can do to just kind of get through the day. And there's a lot of ups and downs, a lot of emotions all throughout the day, but it's like you said, we can't be everywhere at once. Yes, we can do it, but I think if we all just kind of take it at our own pace and just make sure that we're also checking in with ourselves and that we're doing okay, and doing it at the pace that we're comfortable with. So, Courtney, I want to thank you so much for this conversation. It has been, like I said, so insightful and so touching in so many ways. Any last words of advice you'd like to give or share with parents who either might be in a situation like yours or just in general, anything?
I would say to parents in situations like mine, reach out for those resources, try and connect. There's a Facebook group in Ottawa called One More Thing for parents of physically disabled children. I'm sure there's different groups for parents who have children with mental disabilities as well.
Mhm.
One More Thing has been really helpful for me in kind of finding my mom community where I felt that, in some of the other moms groups were not the most fitting to my experience. So reach out for support. And my kind of advice, I guess, to moms in general is we kind of have this societal view, and I think it's propagated by kind of the Instagram mentality of, you know, moms having just like constant sacrifice. And yes, that's kind of part of it. But I've heard things from other moms like, take time for self care. That could be a shower or brushing your teeth. And okay, those are kind of basic human needs.
Yeah.
So I think we need to set the bar a little higher for ourselves. Like, obviously, if all you can get in the day for yourself is a shower, like a nice, hot, long shower, like take that and use it. But, you know, I think it's kind of silly to expect that a mom's way of recharging her batteries is physically cleaning her body or taking a mental moment while you're in the grocery store alone. Set the bar a little higher. Do some self care activities for yourself, whether that is spending time reading a book or, I had acupuncture this week, which was super helpful for me. So, spending an hour outside of your duties as a mom and do something for yourself that's not just eating a sandwich over the sink or having a shower. We can do better for self-care. We need a little more self-love than that, I think.
Yes. Yes. I love it. That's a beautiful message. A good way to end this conversation. Courtney, thank you again. I appreciate it so much. I know it's Sunday morning. We're recording, and our kids are probably all over the place right now, but that's okay. This is us taking the time to have this conversation. So I want to thank you again, and we will definitely catch you again soon.
Thank you for having me.